Is Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott a top 10 quarterback entering the 2022 season? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. We have a special guest joining us today on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. It's Kate Magdziuk, who you might have heard before on a certain Locked On Dynasty podcast with someone that's also on this show. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. I'm ready to talk about some Cowboys, and it's fun because we always get to talk about the Cowboys and some of their assets for fantasy football on the Locked On Dynasty podcast. And I'm always excited to talk about them specifically with you because, I mean, you are the resident expert here, and I get to learn so much from you. So it's an honor to be joining you today, especially on a show where we get to talk about a really interesting bit of news. Marcus.
Yes. So here's the fun part.
Ugh.
Landon and I, we have our thoughts on Dak Prescott, and you guys all know them. You could probably say the words before we even say them, but it's always nice to get an outsider's perspective. So today we have Kate to help us out. So ESPN has been continuing their ranking series. They've been polling NFL coaches, decision makers, executive scouts, and today they were talking about the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. Dak Prescott comes in at number 10, behind quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, Matt Stafford. Okay, I'm just going to start with this. Does that feel like the right spot for him?
It feels low, honestly.
You've already winning points for the Cowboy fans. Let me just say that.
It does. It feels low. And you know what? But like Marcus, this is just par for the course on everything we've ever heard in the narrative surrounding Dak Prescott. When he got paid, it was, what's this bum doing getting a paycheck? Like, there has just never been the kind of respect that Dak Prescott deserves, especially for what he's done. I mean, we saw this franchise that's been like on the clips of winning, but I don't think anybody saw Dak Prescott coming out of really anywhere whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're looking at what he's accomplished in his short time since entering the NFL. It ranks ninth in passing touchdowns, along with same number as Drew Brees, though Drew Brees has one fewer season, but like Drew Brees, the GOAT, man.
Yeah.
Passing yards, ranks 8th in passing yards among all quarterbacks in that span. But like completion percentage, everything that you could possibly want out of this man. He's ranking inside the top 10 in every statistical metric, and he's missed time. He missed time with the ankle injury. He wasn't, necessarily 100% in the immediate bounce back there. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are, because I mean, man, like, why is there such a disrespect surrounding Dak Prescott?
It feels like there's a big disconnect, and I even see it like in fantasy Twitter versus like real life football, right? Because I look at Dak as somebody who 2019, he was phenomenal. 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Cowboys had the number one offense in the league in yards. 2020, before he gets hurt, he's having a really nice season. Cowboys are number one in yards before he gets hurt. Last year, he throws 37 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, despite being banged up for the second half of the year. And the Cowboys are number one in yards and number one in points. So if you're telling me that, hey, I've got this quarterback under center that's going to lead me to the number one offense basically 3 straight years, how is that guy not a top 7, top 8 quarterback? I just can't fathom, like, how do NFL executives put Deshaun Watson ahead of Dak Prescott? And like Russell Wilson last year, not great, and he's aging. put him ahead. Justin Herbert, who I think is absolutely phenomenal. I think he's one of the superstars of the league. I mean, his stats are very similar to Dak, and Dak's might even be a little bit better. So that's my only real complaint here.
It's disrespectful. It's just, and I don't know, like, I've always kind of wondered what would Dak's kind of perception be among, the NFL, even NFL players, in general, if he had a higher draft stock. Like, I know we don't hold
Yes,
on to that,
yes.
like, throughout a player's entire career, but I mean, it's just always been this question mark of why are we looking at him like he's a special talent? He's absolutely a special talent, and he deserves the contract he got. I'm just, I'm kind of fathomed or without a loss. I'm at a loss for words because it doesn't make sense to me. It's not like we're looking at like Mike McCarthy is like, oh well, he's the answer here. Like, what are we looking at as like the common denominator between this, making this roster what it has been over the last few years? I don't think we'd say it's Zeke either. Like, it all comes back to Dak.
Yeah, but you know what? I completely agree with your thoughts that if Dak was if he was a higher pick, he would get a boost. But you know what's so interesting to me, Kate, is I was looking at the same exact list from last year, and the NFL decision makers had Dak seventh. So what did he do last year to warrant a drop in 3 spots? Again, 37 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, passer rating of 104.2. Cowboys were the number one offense in the league, and you drop 3 spots. I don't get it. I want to ask you about what type of season you think Dak is going to have this year, because you are one of the best in the business at predicting, projecting stats going forward and projecting how a player is going to play. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball, golf, UFC. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Kate, as you know, the Cowboys traded away Amari Cooper this offseason. They lost
I
Cedric
heard.
Wilson. Yeah, I mean,
Ugh.
I'm still a little bit bummed about the Amari one, but how do you think Dak is going to perform this year with a less than stellar supporting cast?
I mean, I think, like, Dak is just a dog, and he's gonna fight, and he's going to, I think he's still gonna hold the Cowboys in there, but I do think the pieces that this team has lost it's gonna be a challenge. It's gonna be more of an uphill battle than it's been in the past. Yes, you have still CeeDee Lamb. Yes, you have Ezekiel Elliott. Yes, you have Dak Prescott, but I do think Amari Cooper was a very, like, important part of this offense. I was kind of surprised. I understand your hands are in a bind with Zeke's contract, but I mean, looking at the market and what these wide receivers got in this pay period here of free agency, like Amari Cooper's 20 million per season doesn't feel that bad at all. I worry that we're going to see
No.
some regression in terms of the Dallas Cowboys offensive production. It's not a huge sample size, but it's big enough in the 25 games that the Dallas Cowboys have had, where Amari Cooper played. We see more points. We see them score more points. We see when they've
Mhm.
got Amari Cooper, when they've got Cedric Wilson on the field, they are more productive. Cedric Wilson had one of the highest passer ratings when targeted by Dak among any of these players on the Dallas Cowboys. Like, these are going to, I think, lower that efficiency metric for the Cowboys in general, but specifically for Dak Prescott. Like, the one thing that I'm going to say, Marcus, is that for fantasy football, this might be a good thing for Dak Prescott if he's not able to, be more of that solidified passer. If we see that efficiency go down in the passing game, maybe we see him, start to take off a bit more again. We know he's got the rushing upside. We might see him, maybe play a little bit more with his legs, which I know from a franchise quarterback perspective, you always get a little nervous,
Yep.
but
Yep.
that it could be an interesting year for Dak in terms of his fantasy production.
I have no doubts that he's going to put up big numbers because it's just kind of what he does, right? Whenever he plays with or whenever he's being coached by Kellen Moore, the Cowboys offense is good. Will it be as good as what we saw last year? I think that's up for debate, right? But I think it's still going to be a very, very good offense. All right, Kate, let's talk about another player for the Cowboys. Let's talk about CeeDee Lamb because I think a lot of people are expecting him to have a breakout season for the Cowboys. Obviously, Amari Cooper is gone. Cedric Wilson has left in free agency, and Michael Gallup is coming off an injury. What type of season can we expect from CeeDee Lamb? Because if you listen to like the fantasy community, and if you can see on our YouTube channel right now, Matt Williamson has CeeDee Lamb listed as the number 5 receiver in fantasy. I think a lot of people are expecting a big bounce, or not bounce back, that's the wrong word, a big breakout season for him because he had 1,100 yards last year, 6 touchdowns. I think people are expecting 1,500 yards. Do you expect that?
I'm not sure that I do, Marcus. Like his current ranking here on Matt Williamson's wide receiver rankings, also a co-host of the Locked On Dynasty football podcast here. He's quite high, a wide receiver 5. That feels a little bit rich for me. And it feels that way for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to look at some of the wide receivers being drafted around him or ranked around him here. Mike Evans, for instance, rated as wide receiver 7. I'm going to bump him right up and over CeeDee Lamb here because, I mean, the man's done it a million times. We've seen him be the king of volume. My question is, what do we really expect in terms of a shift for CeeDee Lamb? Because when we're looking at his rookie season, his sophomore season, we didn't really see a huge shift in his usage. Only had 5 more receptions between years 1 and 2, only 9 more targets. It's not as though we saw this massive shift in earned target share. We always say targets are earned; they're not given just based on the fact that Amari Cooper's not there. They always say vacated targets usually go to the running backs. Hashtag Tony Pollard. I think you have to be banking on CeeDee Lamb to be hitting like 9-10 targets a game if you're hoping he finishes in the top 5. I just don't think that's how Dak Prescott plays the game. He doesn't default. He doesn't lock into one specific player. He plays the field. And that's why we've seen so much success from a number of assets for fantasy, because I feel like they always get drafted kind of low. Like Amari Cooper, he was this perennial value, just was never drafted super high, but he always came through because he'll have those monster games, the upsides there. But CeeDee Lamb, you're going to have to bank on consistency. And Marcus, we just haven't seen that ceiling for CeeDee Lamb yet. Like over the past 2 seasons, I believe you've seen 4 total wide receiver 1 games from CeeDee Lamb in fantasy football.
And I don't know
he's being
that's
drafted
his
as
fault.
the top dog.
Right, and I don't know if that's his fault. It's more because that's just what kind of quarterback Dak Prescott is. He just doesn't pepper guys with he doesn't pepper one receiver with a bunch of targets. Like last year, Kate, only 4 games of double-digit targets for CeeDee Lamb. Like he has yet to have with Dak Prescott as his quarterback a game with 10 or more receptions. Like in order for him to become like a top 3 or 4 fantasy receiver, he needs to just see a lot more volume. And I think there's a lot of people making the case this year that, hey, because there's no Amari Cooper, because there's no Cedric Wilson, he's going to get all this volume. I just, with the way that Dak has played his NFL career so far, we're going into what, year 6, year 7? That's just not how he operates.
Yeah, I think it's probably like the safer way to approach projecting this team is to add like a couple of targets per game to each of these assets.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of how this is going to be played. Again, give plenty of targets to Zeke, plenty of targets for Tony Pollard. It's just the way that Dak Prescott plays football, he plays intelligently. He's not a guy that locks into his first read and tosses the ball. He knows how to spread the ball, and I worry about that with CeeDee Lamb, and I worry about that just especially given his draft cost.
So if you had to project CeeDee Lamb stats this year, again, last year just over 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns, 79 receptions. What type of numbers are you looking for CeeDee Lamb to have this year?
I mean, I'm going to project him probably right around like 1,250 receiving yards. I think that's pretty within the realm of possibility. I think right around maybe 100 and I don't know 35 targets. Like I don't know that he's going to
Yeah,
get
it'd be
that many
15
more.
more than last year. Yep.
Yeah, like I don't think it's going to be this huge jump. I think maybe in from years 1 to year 2, we saw a increase in his yards per reception. We might see that go down a little bit without Amari Cooper on the field. We might see that efficiency drop a little bit, and that might kind of balance things out in terms of like if we're projecting him for an increased target share, but those targets are less efficient, then I think we're going to kind of look at the same sort of season. I'm going to have him projected probably right around wide receiver 10 to 12
Mhm.
on in fantasy football, and there's no way on God's green earth he's going to make it down to
No.
where I can draft him for where I project he's going to finish.
I want to talk about one more player, Kate, before we head out. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Rock Auto. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock up on all the parts you need. But Rock Auto has everything from engine control modules, brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. All prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and they're the same and do-it-yourselfers. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your truck. Right, Locked On in the "How did you hear about us" box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. All right, the last player I want to talk to you about is Dalton Schultz. So, Cowboy fans know that we've got, I think, 3 or 4 days until the long-term franchise tag extension deadline
You
closes.
guys sweating?
The Yes, no, because it doesn't seem like the Cowboys have really any interest in signing him to a long-term deal. And I have mixed feelings because I think Dalton Schultz is a good player. I think it's pretty fair to say he's not a great player, but is he somebody that could continue to improve? What are his stats going to look like this year? Kate, that's what I want to know from you, because if you look at how he's performed over the last couple of seasons, since 2020, he has the 4th most fantasy points among tight ends. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and Darren Waller are the only tight ends with more fantasy points. Do you anticipate Schultz having an even better season this year with, again, no Amari Cooper, no Cedric Wilson?
I kind of do, and again, this might sound counterintuitive to the CeeDee Lamb take, but I mean the wide receiver market and the tight end market here, not even comparable. Like 2 targets per game added on to Dalton Schultz projection already. Like he was already ranking 6th among tight ends in targets. So if you add 20 targets to that, yeah, he's gonna that moves the needle more so than it does for a wide receiver in general due to the positional scarcity. It finished just so steadily over the course of the last season, had 11 weeks where he was a tight end 1. Like Marcus, there's just so little consistency at the tight end position. I think Dalton Schultz, especially this year, as long as he's going to be on the field, as long as there's not some sort of like, I'm not going to play on the franchise tag kind of dispute, I think he's going to finish as a top 5 tight end. We see year in and year out, like a lot of the times that we see, maybe Travis Kelce is like the exception here, but a
Mhm.
lot of the times when we see these big boom performances from tight ends, it's because maybe their team lost a receiving asset, or maybe they're functioning as their team's true wide receiver 1. I think Dalton Schultz is going to benefit, from that loss of target share, especially while Michael Gallup is still making his return to the game. Dalton Schultz is probably going to be on a lot of my fantasy
Yeah.
teams. We know the upsides there. And I mean, the floor is really safe. Out of 17 games last year, he only finished in 4 weeks where he wasn't at least a top 24 tight end. The floor is safe and the ceiling is high. Give me all of the Dalton Schultz, please, and thank you.
And one thing that I wanted to point out about Schultz is where he could even be better this year. Is last year the Cowboys used CeeDee Lamb a lot in the slot as like their field stretcher, right? He's the one that's running the seam routes, making plays down the field. I think that could be Schultz this year with CeeDee playing more on the outside. Michael Gallup is an outside receiver. They really just don't have that player that can stretch the seam vertically. And we actually saw Dalton Schultz in the final 8 games of the season. He only averaged 9 yards per catch. I think the Cowboys have got to find ways to get him the ball a little bit further down the field where he can, make some plays in space. We know he's really good after the catch. So get him the ball when it's, 10, 15 yards down the field and see what can happen. I also think, Kate, there's a good chance that he could lead the Cowboys in touchdown receptions this year. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the one that's getting a lot of the red zone looks. He's getting a lot of the goal line looks. So last season, 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. Is 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns out of the realm of possibilities? I don't think so.
Your point, Marcus, on be playing a bit more on the outside. They're going to need him to play more on the outside. They're definitely going to need to make some changes. We saw Cedric Wilson play plenty out of the slot last year. They're going to need somebody to absorb some more of those snaps. And I mean, with the chemistry we've already seen from Dalton Schultz with Dak Prescott, like, why wouldn't it be him? It just get him in the slot, get Tony Pollard in the slot, and we're just going to have a really good time in 2022, even if we do see a little bit of regression. Like, the Cowboys offense is just always one that's fun to watch, but I do think that side of CeeDee Lamb, this is a really interesting team for fantasy because it doesn't feel like they're all that properly valued.
Yeah.
I
agree.
People buy low, buy the dip.
So to sum up the podcast, you're thinking Dak's going to have a little bit of a regression this year in terms of a passer, maybe a little bit more running. CeeDee Lamb still a little bit overvalued. Dalton Schultz maybe a little bit undervalued.
Smash,
Yes. Last one. Who would you rather have on your dynasty, or who would you rather have on your fantasy football team? Not in week 1, but like, let's say week 14, 15, when the playoffs roll around. Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard.
I'm still gonna go with Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah,
I do
I agree
think,
with you on this
man,
one.
he's just gonna touch the ball 17 million times, Marcus. It doesn't matter what we want them to do. I think Tony Pollard is just such a stud. I love his efficiency. I love the way he plays, but I do think that I mean, Ezekiel Elliott, like, he's so undervalued. He's going to finish as a tight end or a RB1 yet again. I mean, last year performed just on par with all of the elites, despite all of his injuries. I'm gonna have so many Cowboys on my fantasy team next year, and I'm not even trying to kiss butt on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, but they are. I feel like a lot of these guys are just undervalued in general. I mean, Zeke had as many 15 or more PPR games as Alvin Kamara. He had more than Joe Mixon, Antonio Gibson, Leonard Fournette. Like, he's the guy that won you your league last year that nobody wants to talk about. And I don't know. He's probably going to do it again. It's so annoying, but he's going to do it again.
What's really fun about the Cowboys this year for fantasy? Again, I know we're diving into fantasy, and fantasy football season's around the corner, guys. So it's okay. It's okay that we're talking about this on July 11th. But you could stack the Cowboys offense pretty cheaply this year, right? Because CeeDee Lamb is like a second round pick on underdog fantasy. You can get Dak Prescott late. If you want to get Ezekiel Elliott, his current ADP is 40. You could get CeeDee, Zeke, and Dak, and Dalton Schultz for that matter, all pretty cheap. And again, as we've talked about earlier in the show, whenever Dak Prescott is healthy, this is the number 1 offense in the NFL. So We'll see, Kate. All right. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. And thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen today. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. You can follow Kate on Twitter at FFBallBlast. You can also check her out on the awesome Locked On Dynasty podcast, if I do say so myself. And Kate,
Only
before we
marginally
head out,
biased.
do you want to tell people about the draft that we're currently doing right now, the Scott Fish Bowl?
Oh, heck yes. Guys, if you haven't heard of it, it's like just an amazing story. Even if you don't play fantasy football, even if you're not a fantasy football like player or fan, or you don't like the game, it doesn't really matter. Scott Fishbowl annual charity event. Right now, I think there's correct me if I'm wrong, 3,000 people in this charity
3,000
league
teams.
tournament.
Yep.
Just absolutely just bonkers. So you've got 1 million drafts going on right now. And the goal is all to raise money for charity. So like in the past, they've raised so much money for Toys for Tots, given so many kids an opportunity to have an awesome Christmas and not feel left out of the action. This year, I'm playing in the Pawnee division, which
Parks
if
and Recs.
we have
Yep.
Parks and Rec, baby. If anybody has any spirit in them here, like Leslie Nope, let's go. Like our charity this year, for every time we win an event, we're gonna donate $5 to, I think we found the like Parks and Rec of Indiana, like the
Oh, that's
actual
great.
department,
That's
and we're gonna
fantastic.
make some donations there. But it's such a good spirited event. You can follow along with picks. My first pick was Patrick Mahomes at the 103. I'm liking it.
I went with Jonathan Taylor at 104 in the King's Landing from Game of Thrones. A lot of fun. Follow along. You can follow this podcast at Locked On Cowboys. Check us out over on YouTube. You can follow me at Marcus_Mosher. We've got guests lined up all week with Landon being out on vacation. So we'll see you guys right back here on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.